Thank you. So for those of you who don't know Chris and I, we both work together with the Fisheries Independent Monitoring Program with the state of Florida for a while before moving back to Michigan within the last couple of years. So I'm in Manistee, Chris is in the Traverse City area, and we did a lot of remote camera work down in Florida for reef fish surveys, and a lot of that data was used for stock assessments for certain species. So when we moved back to Michigan, we saw maybe there could be some utility for this type of survey within the Great Lakes area. So we would deploy these cameras on the reefs, and they're used for stock assessment, modeling, looking at fish population trends in the Gulf of Mexico, and we thought maybe we could do that here in Lake Michigan as well, and potentially use it for stock assessments for lake trout, lake whitefish, those more benthic species that these cameras would pick up. We would also like to use it on our historical spawning reefs for lake trout or lake whitefish as well. So we survey every fall our fall spawning assessment using gill nets. And so this past fall, I decided to deploy some cameras on some of our historical spawning areas using GoPros this past year, but we'll talk about what we're using in the future. So some of the benefits to using cameras, it creates a permanent record. So like Peter had said, you can go back and look at these data in the future depending on your research needs. These cameras have stereo lenses, so we're able to actually get really accurate measurement data. We can identify, count, and measure fish using these cameras. We can also potentially identify wild versus hatchery lake trout fish. And we can also, with the camera survey, as opposed to just nets, we are able to identify small or cryptic species that we see on cameras that we aren't going to be catching in nets, like round gobies, maybe smaller lake trout. The cameras are also non-destructive, minimally invasive. We can set them in areas where we might not want to set gill nets or areas where we don't want to leave gill nets overnight. They also can observe fish behavior, so potentially spawning behavior, and then associate those fish directly with the habitat that they're utilizing. So last fall, we just kind of wanted to do a proof of concept, like, all right, if we set these cameras out, are we actually gonna see fish? So Little River Band, we have two spawning reefs, Arcadia Reef and Ludington Reef, seen there on the left. So last fall I deployed 10 cameras. I had some pre-spawn camera deployments, some during spawning time for lake trout, and then one post-spawn. And just to kind of give you some reference, here's where we set our fall spawning nets. So I decided to set during fall spawn because I anticipated that there would be a spatial aggregation of fish during that time. And I deployed the cameras for a maximum of between 20 and 30 minutes, but I only read 20 minutes of the video, and then characterized habitat metrics, so substrate, relief, biota, different categories that we saw for habitat. And then for each of those 20-minute reads, we identified the maximum number of individuals of a species visible within one frame. And this prevents double counting fish that might just be swimming around in a circle. So it's the maximum number of fish that you see on the screen at one time. And I have a couple, let's see if it plays. If you're able. Oh, okay. I think it's playing. So in the back, this is kind of our typical spawning reef, this rocky habitat, pretty low relief, but some boulders. You have a lake trout in the back and then a whitefish that swam on the left side as well. So we did see fish. That was pretty exciting. And then this next one, there's a school of lake trout in the back there. It might be kind of hard to see on the lighter video. I think this one had about 7 of them in the back. And then in this video, you can see that it's actually a hatchery clipped lake trout swimming through our spawning area. So this was just from 10 videos, and I consolidated them for pre-spawn and then spawn and post-spawn. And in this table I have the water temperature at the time of sampling. So I think we set 4 cameras during pre-spawn, and every single one of those videos had round goby present, and only one of the 4 had a lake trout. And then all of our spawning videos, every single one of them had lake trout present. So our max N of lake trout was 7 within a 20-minute read. But as you can see, the water temperature changed quite a bit between our pre-spawn and spawning survey, and the round goby left, presumably migrated offshore. And I just found that to be pretty interesting. We saw round goby on our sandier sites as well as with the rockier habitat, and especially in our area, goby predation on lake trout and lake whitefish eggs is a concern, but at least last year it didn't seem like there was any overlap between goby and lake trout during our spawning time, and I thought that was pretty cool that we were able to catch that with this video survey. And I just wanted to mention that this past year we just had a single GoPro looking 2 directions, but moving forward we will have stereo cameras, so we will be able to get measurement data.
So yeah, looking forward, we are kind of forecasting this study to the idea of what it could become, and noticing that the push for a lake by 2030 really helps us, because we need habitat mapped information for us to really do good spatially representative information. So with that information, we have such things like the fixation, which we are using for our reef assessments currently. Those are known habitats that are occupied during particular times of year that are really beneficial for our understanding of the population. And then also with the habitat information that we're going to gather, potentially there's a stratified random sampling design that we can incorporate where we are targeting specific depths, specific cobble, specific exposed limestone hard bottoms or a source like that. So areas where we know this habitat differs from one another, we can characterize those and sample them randomly. Another things we need to think about in moving forward, or we can do the day versus night sampling. There are different congregations or aggregations that can happen during those times, so we need to identify those. Also the crepuscular periods. Then the video duration is an interesting one. Coming from our background, we only needed a 20-minute read because that's where we could really categorize the area the fishes are aggregating in. But with the different community structures in the Great Lakes, maybe we need a longer video, maybe it's just a shorter video. So we need to identify those differences and determine what catchability and selectivity look like during that time. The last thing is the baited versus unbaited. So we used to use baited a lot because that was a way to congregate fish to the camera. It's easier to identify them and then get those more accurate measurements that we need. But that also includes more time, labor costs just to get those fish or get that standardization to that. So we need to determine whether that's a valuable tool or not, and then what bait do we use, whether it's worms or do we use eggs and such. So things we are looking forward and forecasting what we're going to do. And then for data analysis, as Tina mentioned, we really wanted to put this in the stock assessments because we are going to get relative abundances out of these. These are point count estimates. They're geo-referenced, so we'll be able to have spatially characterized information and use that potentially in models. The AI potential of this is already being used in other systems. It's just for us to have to teach it and learn, have the system learn what we're doing, just as Pete's been going through with his thousands of video characterizations and identifying what's the difference between the substrate and the fish, and then having it accurately convince itself what it is, and putting enough uncertainties on that so that we are removing the uncertainties from those with a certain threshold. And lastly, we're going to observe trends not only within the fish species, so we'll see trends over time, but we're also in the habitat. So if you see those little photos, we have 2 habitats. One was probably 20 years ago, and one's present day, or even could be the spring versus summer. So little characterizations like that we're going to identify and have recorded quantitatively. Now, moving forward, we have funding secured. We are building these cameras. We're going to have them fabricated and field tested or calibrated within the next, hopefully, 2 months. This is just a general guideline for us. We're just trying to make these deadlines so that we can get on top of things. So we get field tested, and come the spring season, we're going to have these things out in the water testing or sampling alongside of our fall spawning surveys. So we'll have gill nets going through the water, and we'll have these cameras going in the water, and we'll have an ability to quantify the aggregations that go on and be able to see the pulse that comes through in relation to our gill nets as well. And then we'll determine, kind of see that catchability and selectivity relations to the other gears. In between the fall spawning survey, during that duration, we're going to do as much as video reading as we can. This stuff does stockpile up pretty quick, and it's a lot of information to process. So with the low resources we have with getting these things processed, we're just going to try to crank them out as fast as we can and get that stuff completed before the end of the year. And by the beginning of next year, we'll have the data analyzed and some project updates to share. So goals and objectives of this is I think some people think this is going to supersede the gill net, but it's actually a complement survey to that, because we still need a lot of the information that's being recovered from the gill net survey. So we still need the lengths, or we still need the weights, we still need the ages, we still need the sex ratios. All that information is still very valuable, but in complement to that, now we can also do a larger spatial representation using these cameras to do relative abundances on a greater scale, because we can drop these cameras for a short period, recover it, and deploy it in the same day at a different location. So in that case, we could potentially reduce the number of nets, because now we're getting that spatial representation of relative abundances, and also there is an opportunity that potentially we can even rotate surveys annually, where there's not a really hard need to have to sample every time with one particular survey. We can rotate these moving forward. With that rotation or use the sharing of gears during the assessments, we are going to determine, again, like I said multiple times now, we're going to determine catchability and selectivity between the gears, the camera gear in relation to the gill net survey. We're also going to monitor the spawning navigations that come on during the fall survey. That's another goal. And then identify the habitat utilized in that survey in relation to the spawning aggregations, or this is any species that really comes on. It doesn't have to be the ones that are trying to utilize it for reproduction at that time. And then lastly, we're going to try to quantify or record as much intra and inter-community relations as possible, so species interacting with each other and within the species complex. And then in summary, we're just hopefully putting this stuff into stock assessments. When we get the kind of the nuances worked out, it's really just the preliminary stuff now, but the goal of this is to really get enough information and get this a utility of this survey so that it can relate to the current surveys that are ongoing and use it as an additional tool. And then make this a long-term monitoring project. So right now we have particular projects that are just seasonally suspect, so they just sample that time. But this is hopefully long-term, not only in those seasons, but also against those surveys that are currently ongoing, but also the entire duration. So if we have an opportunity to get out there in the summer, we'll take advantage of that and hopefully build a sampling design that is functional and inclusive. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for Commission and all of you for having us.